Okay, let's welcome Adam Huss to the show now. Adam is the host of the Beyond Organic Wine podcast. He's the owner and winemaker at Centralas Wine in Los Angeles, California, and the creator of Crenshaw Cru Wine Garden in South LA. Hey, Adam, how's it going? And thanks for being on the podcast today.
Fritz, thanks so much. It's a real pleasure. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, well, I know the first time we met was virtually, and I believe it was when you were working or interning, if you will, or however you want to call that, with Paicines Ranch and our good friend Kelly Mulville, our good friend and specialist on regenerative agriculture and viticulture, sheep grazing expert. He's been on the podcast to talk about sheep grazing and vineyards. So
yes, I listened to that.
Yeah.
Great
So
episode.
I met you kind of virtually there, and then when I was out at the Unified Wine and Grape Symposium this past January 2025, ran into you on a lunch break randomly, and I was like chatting with you, and then we realized, hey, we know each other. This is cool. Okay, your background and journey to what you do now is kind of unusual, so let's start there. You didn't start out in the wine industry. You had a successful 15 plus year career, not at all related to wine or vineyards. So talk me through this. Where did you come from and how did you end up doing a podcast on Beyond Organic Wine and then making wine? And we're going to talk about all the projects you're doing.
Well, I mean, it was a 15-year career in nonprofit. So in a way, it was very directly related to working in wine.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I mean, I've been in love with wine. It was sort of like I'm a creative person, and have been sort of here in Hollywood and, worked at the Writers Guild Foundation and then the SAG-AFTRA Foundation. And it's get to meet incredible people. I ended up as chief of staff at SAG-AFTRA Foundation. And, it's just one of those things, like, people don't believe the kind of experiences you have when you're outside of Hollywood and tell them like what you do. It's one of those kind of things. So it's fun, had a great time, but always on the side. Since the early 2000s, really fell in love with wine and started studying it and writing about it. And then, made my first wine in 2007, planted my first vines in 2012. And finally in 2019, I was like, oh, I want to, I think I'm like, life is short. Let's do this, and started the commercial winery, Centralas, went legit. And then, really started the podcast as a way to meet other people who were kind of nerdy like me and wanted to be thoughtful about wine in a different way. And so, just to find that community and to learn from each other and to share those resources with other people and build a sort of library of useful and practical, both winemaking, but really like it's really become there's some great winemaking advice, incredible people. There's like a library of just like some legendary folk. Some people I'm very fortunate to have because, they're now passed on and as well as really I've focused deeper and deeper on wine growing and expanding the definition of wine beyond just grapes. And so that's kind of where it's headed.
There's other aspects of growing grapes or making wine from non-grapes. So we think of organic vineyards, we think of sustainability. And what comes up a lot in your feed is the word ecological production of wine. So where do all those categories, where do you fit with that? And how do you decide how to move forward when you're curating for your audience?
I try to meet people where they are, first of all. It's hard on a podcast. I just have to follow my fascination and my passion in the moment and the journey that I'm on and hope that people will be able to if it's kind of over their head at the moment, go back and listen to some of the older stuff before I got to this point kind of thing. I say that because I can go back and listen to my first episodes that I did with people who were just introducing me to some of these ideas of like thinking beyond that. And I remember I had a conversation with Andy Brennan, who's a cider maker on the East Coast. And he was talking about like, if you think about it on a spectrum, he's like, organic is kind of in the middle. If conventional is one side and, wild is on the other end of it, it's like organic is kind of in the middle. And there's all these things between organic and wild that are beyond organic, like it's kind of the gateway to that end of the spectrum. And so you're just starting to explore once you get there, like it's really just the start of the journey and the threshold that you cross to get into all these other exciting things. And so ecological becomes that sort of catch-all for me that, it's the least sort of trendy buzzword, I guess is the other way I look at it too. Or it's like even regenerative is now being co-opted and greenwashed. And, as much as there's fantastic things behind all of these things, we see that pattern of something becomes trendy, then it becomes co-opted, and then you just end up with a lot of greenwashing. And the people who are doing the good work just have continued to do the good work, like Kelly, who, he's like, he's not getting caught up in the terms. He's more focused on the substance of it. And it's not about, selling something for him. It's about just pursuing like what's best for that piece of land that he's working on.
Yeah.
And so that's how I think of it. Of course, the textbook definition of ecology is the relationship between organisms and their environment. When you extrapolate from that, it's really about this interconnectedness. And I think that's a real important part of it for me. I think we start to farm differently when we start to see ourselves as part of something bigger than ourselves. And I think that's how I use it to evoke that.
If you're a traditional grape grower or you're a commercial grape grower, whatever you want to label yourself as, but you grow grapes for a living or a profession, it's highly unlikely that you're doing vitiforestry. You're doing more of a monoculture. Maybe you're introducing animals, maybe you're introducing cover crops, diversity in many ways. But when I first heard about vitiforestry, I had to say, I was perplexed, didn't know what it really meant, but it's intriguing. And the word itself is kind of cool. So having worked with many experts and having purchased a piece of land where you're considering embarking on such adventure, we'll have to get you on in 10 years and you can tell us how it went. But for now, why don't you just tell us what your take on vitiforestry is and maybe put your definition behind that?
Yeah. Well, and in some ways I've been practicing it here in South Los Angeles as well for a few years, as a microcosm test site. But yeah, there's so many ways. It's a big catch-all. So, just if you say viticulture, there's so many ways people are doing that, so many trellising styles, there's so many different ways you can do it. And the same is true for vitiforestry. So it can be as minimal as just like, people are starting to think about hedgerows, for example, and reintroducing hedgerows and breaking up vineyard spaces with hedgerows that are trees that both help with wind and help with moisture, help with help with shade, which now more and more shade used to be a bad thing. Now we kind of want a little more shade than we used to want. And so it can be as simple as that. I've heard, one of the experts I talked about was donuts, zebras, and I forget what the polka dots. So like if you think about, you can put trees all around your vineyard, make a donut. You can do inter-row planting, so you have like zebra stripes, or you can just speckle them throughout, like just have instead of an entire row of trees, you can just have trees dotted throughout the sort of vineyard landscape. And but it's really the idea of introducing biodiversity, introducing a multi-level, potentially multi-level, multi-crop potential, and multi-species, and possibly increase your productivity, having a second crop. Like you can have a vineyard and an orchard, a vineyard in one place.
The philosophy of the winemaking for you, is it to try to only use wild ingredients, or are you accepting some things? I know you have a lot of transparency and labeling that you talk about with your wines.
No, yes, I do. That was one of the pillars of starting Centralas I just really believe in standing behind anything I do to the wine. And so when I say ingredients, obviously it's like there's a bazillion different compounds in grapes that you couldn't list if you were trying to list them all, but it's anything that I added during the winemaking process. That's what I consider an ingredient. So I use grapes, sulfites. If I ever use water or tartaric acid, I would list that. I'm making wine in Los Angeles, so there is like a big natural wine movement here. I think it's tapered and, it's not as big as it once was, but wanting to appeal to people who care about that, and also just wanting to stand behind like the fact that I'm not, there's not like an ingredients list of 5 to 10 things that nobody's ever heard of. Just like when I read, it just starts to feel like a processed food or like a wine beverage rather than a wine. This is my own personal take on it. Everybody has their own thing. But I like the idea of being creative with the natural ingredients that you have. Again, thinking ecologically, because it's also like, whether it's farming or winemaking, I like to problem solve without inputs, so it's like, how did we do this 2000 years ago? Clearly we didn't like spoiled wine 2000 years ago. So what did we use? Things like pine pitch and things like that to help. And, and yet this also informs the terroir of the wine, because terroir is more than just like a grape reflecting dirt. It's like, what is the human culture? What are the available ingredients that you are able to work with to make that wine a stable, delicious, unique, special thing that is representative of where you are, but also working with what is available where you are. So like if you grow pine trees, maybe you make Retsina, that kind of thing to